What's going on, everybody? Happy Friday. Sam Shapiro back here with more of your Heat latest on FanArc. Breaking news regarding Erik Spoelstra being named the new head coach of the USA men's basketball team. But before we get into that, don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here, Monday through Friday. So like I just said, the news of this Friday, Erik Spoelstra was named yesterday as the next coach for the USA national men's basketball team. And quite honestly, if you look at the majority of the coaches in the NBA right now, there are very few other candidates, I feel like, that have the track record and resume to be worthy of this role. So I'm very excited to see Grant Hill officially deciding on Spoelstra to succeed Steve Kerr as as the USA Olympic team kind of makes their way looking towards the 2028 Olympics after just coming off a gold medal win in the 2024 Olympics, where Spoelstra was one of the lead assistants in that staff as well. And now he is going to be part of a long lineage of historic coaches over the last 9 to 10 years, I believe, that really kind of were legendary coaches that led USA men's basketball to a high level of success, following in the footsteps of Coach K, Greg Popovich, and now Steve Kerr. So quite honestly, when you especially look at what Spoelstra has been able to do, at least for this Miami organization, since he took over his first season in the 2008-2009 season, and quite honestly, he was able to really navigate being able to bring 2 championships to South Beach with superstar level talent. And this is no easy feat. I mean, we once saw a Lakers team kind of in the same timeline with Steve Nash, Kobe Bryant, and Dwight Howard that weren't able to really make any sort of headway towards being a lethal, dangerous team to really be worried about in the grand scheme of things. But he was able to navigate that star power along with supporting cast members like Shane Battier, Mike Miller, Norris Cole, to 2 NBA championships, 4 finals appearances while that big 3 was intact. And then just a few seasons later, leading a team with Jimmy Butler at the helm, and then Bam Adebayo and Tyler Herro at times to 2 finals appearances. Now, granted, don't get me wrong, they weren't able to quite get over the hump in either of those in those seasons really, but it definitely speaks a lot to the type of coach Spoelstra is, because the 2 years they made those finals, they were definitely not the favorites to go. They were definitely not one of those teams that sources or analysts were saying, oh, you got to watch out for the Miami Heat. Maybe the second go around, because they knew what Miami was capable of, at least in the bubble, but that season also kind of has asterisks over it. But again, I would say any coach that would be named to coach, the highest level of talent, at least in American basketball, is a surprise to kind of just at least be named right now at this point in time. But given Spoelstra's track record, I think there are very few other coaches, at least in the league right now, that are more deserving of this position. So it was nice to see Grant Hill want to pick one of the former assistants under Steve Kerr and Erik Spoelstra to give this job to and follow in the footsteps of so many historic coaches before him. So congratulations to Erik Spoelstra being named the new head coach of Team USA's men's basketball team. And now diving into some trade proposals that I had saw this week, some mock trade ideas that could potentially benefit Miami, or at least parts of their roster in some way, shape, or how. The first one of revolving around De'Aaron Fox, Could Miami potentially benefit from trading Powell and Wiggins for the guard out of San Antonio? And quite honestly, I don't necessarily think this is the worst trade idea in the world. It's definitely a whole lot better than a lot of the deals I saw involving Bam Adebayo and a Miami Heat rebuild, that's for sure. But when you look at how it would necessarily benefit both teams, the Spurs have Dylan Harper and Stephon Castle in their backcourt already. Granted, two young guys that still have a lot to develop and show for in terms of what they're able to bring to the floor, but they would be getting complementary bigger players in their lineup like Powell and Wiggins, which would add some depth to a team that is already going to be built around Wembanyama for the foreseeable future. So I definitely think in that regard it benefits San Antonio, but it also benefits Miami, because now you have 3 very solid all-star caliber pillars to really carry this team. It bolsters the starting lineup a lot more, especially in the backcourt with Tyler Herro back and healthy. And I mean, again, this is the preseason, so I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we've definitely seen inklings of the young core Miami is trying to build to be a great secondary unit that potentially in a couple seasons could maybe step up and be complementary starters to that lethal backcourt to pair up with Bam. I don't think Yaku Chones is ready to be a starting point guard in the NBA, despite really looking like one of the best passers Miami has seen. And as long as I really could remember, if not maybe Goran Dragic kind of treading along those lines a little bit. But one of the best facilitators Miami has seen in recent years. He's only 19 years old. He's got a lot to develop, and he had a very rough summer league. So I definitely think he's going to be a guy that's coming off the bench. And now with Harrow out, you definitely have really Davion Mitchell or Terry Rozier that's going to be carrying the torch at the point guard spot. Now, I'm not saying Miami should necessarily get all excited and trade off Norman Powell to acquire a guy like De'Aaron Fox, because at least at this point in time right now, it looks like Powell is going to be the leading scorer for Miami, at least until Harrow comes back, because at least in the preseason games he showed so far, and again, I'm taking this all with a grain of salt here, he showed that he can score off the catch and shoot, but he can also create shots for himself. And that's a huge thing for this Miami team that doesn't really have a clear-cut superstar to build the rest of their roster around. They've got a lot of great pieces, a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things, both defensively, in transition, offensively, can score from a lot of different points on the floor. But adding a guy like De'Aaron Fox, I think, again, would add some more star power to Miami's team. And we definitely know for sure, with 3 former Kentucky Wildcats on the roster, and Pat Riley being a former Wildcat himself, Miami loves their Kentucky players, and De'Aaron Fox, arguably one of the best point guards for at least the Kentucky Wildcats over the last 10, 15 years rather. So I don't necessarily see how it wouldn't work out, at least at that point in time, building the Miami Wildcats, if you will, at that point. So kind of seeing that Kentucky chemistry kind of take shape could definitely bolster some sort of recipe for success. Now, I don't think this would maybe benefit Miami's roster at this point in time, because the Heat team really trying to see how this current roster is going to gel. But I think maybe in a trade deadline scenario, if Rozier doesn't necessarily work out, if Harrow is kind of in and out of the lineup and can't necessarily stay healthy, and Powell and Wiggins aren't really integrating themselves into the lineup the way that the organization wants to see, this could definitely be a move that would bolster Miami, especially at the point guard spot, and make their backcourt look absolutely lethal, adding guys like Yaku Chones to kind of maybe play alongside, run a double point guard backcourt, or kind of plug and playing him with some of the other players in the rotation like Jovic or Ware or Jaime Jaquez Jr., assuming he looks as confident as he did in this past game against the Spurs. But again, also the preseason, taking it all with a grain of salt here. I like to be an optimist, and I try to assume best case scenario is hopefully going to be the scenario, at least for this Heat team. But drop in the comments if you think Miami would benefit from trading Wiggins and Powell for De'Aaron Fox, exchanging 2 very solid players that are definitely going to contribute for Miami in the win column, at least in the starting rotation this year, for a potential all-star that could create some sort of big 3 for Miami in the foreseeable future, because I don't think this is a completely far-fetched end-all deal that could be seen at the deadline, especially because we've seen De'Aaron Fox's scoring numbers going from roughly averaging around 23 points a game during his time with the Kings to a little under 20 points a game with the Spurs, but he's also sharing that scoring load now with Wembanyama, who's arguably a generational player, or at least is being called that at this point in time. So I wouldn't be necessarily surprised if Fox has to take on a little bit more of a scoring role if he joins a Miami Heat team where you're taking out Miami's arguably best scorer going into this upcoming season. But again, drop in the comments what you think, if this trade would be Miami giving up a little too much of their valuable assets to acquire an all-star, or if this is an all-star that could help Miami move forward even more so than in comparison with the current pieces they have right now. And then moving over to another trade idea that I think could definitely deepen the rotation for Miami in the grand scheme of things. This trade deal would involve either one of those players I had just suggested, potentially getting traded for Lou Dort. And another thing Miami loves on top of Kentucky Wildcats is they love their 3-and-D guys, obviously. And Lou Dort was one of those really rotational 3-and-D guys for the Oklahoma City Thunder, who just won an NBA championship. So I think you're getting a 3-and-D guy who's a champion that could maybe step up in certain scenarios and potentially get plugged into the starting lineup depending on what the matchup looks like, who's healthy, who's not, but could also be a really solid guy on both sides of the court coming off the bench. And I definitely think he adds more to Miami's roster. Again, you can kind of plug him in between that 2 and 3 spot. So it would take some of the load off necessarily Jovic in the front court, would allow him to kind of play more efficiently in transition, being in the corner, being ready for three, getting ready for an outside shot, which I think is one of the strong suits of his game. And obviously we've seen his points kind of decline over the last couple of years, but that's because of, the star power really developing in OKC and him not necessarily having to carry as much of a scoring type of load, at least with that Thunder team, I think. So I definitely think this is a guy that could bolster Miami's overall depth in their lineup. I don't necessarily think Wiggins or Powell would necessarily, be worth that. I think Dort would maybe have to get attached with a draft pick or two, just because I think Wiggins is a little bit more of a quality player and Powell obviously a much more quality player than Lou Dort. But drop in the comments if you think this could be an idea that would potentially deepen the rotation for Miami and would add another 3-and-D champion that could hopefully bolster more success for Miami going down the line to potentially maybe have a superstar and be one of those pieces to, really a building block to kind of play around a superstar player that could come into Miami, because we've kind of seen him do it with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and then complementing guys like J-Dub and then obviously Chet Holmgren definitely could be a very interesting thing to kind of see, or Jalen Williams, I meant to say. But drop in the comments if you think that would be a solid trade or not, because I think Lou Dort would be a solid piece in most championship rosters, but could also fit in Miami's rotation in some way, shape, or form. And now moving over to some other news regarding ESPN and their predictions for the Eastern Conference regular season standings. They're now saying that Miami is probably, or they at least think that Miami is going to finish 10th in the Eastern Conference. I mean, are you serious? Before I get into that, I just want to name the other 9 teams that they have listed before Miami, that being the Cavaliers at 1, the Magic at 2, which I thought was kind of interesting. Granted, they have Desmond Bane now, which definitely bolsters the overall strength of that roster, but I don't see them being a 2 seed over the Knicks at 3. And then they've got the Pacers at 4, the Celtics at 5, the Bucks at 6, followed by the Hawks at 7, and the Pistons at 8. And then they have the Toronto Raptors at 9, all before Miami. And quite honestly, I think this is absolutely, I think it's a little bit ridiculous. This might come just because of how preseason play has kind of developed, and Miami hasn't been able to bring one of those preseason games home. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter that Miami wasn't able to win any of these games. They've shown signs that they can be a winning team for the long haul with the pieces that they're developing right now, and how we've kind of just talked about these last 3 games over the course of the last week. I definitely think Miami could have a better overall regular season record, at least than the Raptors and the Hawks, and potentially even the Pacers and the Celtics, depending on how their roster kind of shapes up without, their main guys being in the rotation. Now, Tatum has kind of said that he wants to try to play this season. I'm not super optimistic on that at this point in time, so that's why I see Boston kind of floating around that 5 spot. They're very similar to Miami in the way that they always somehow find a way to sneak their way into some sort of postseason berth, whether their team is bolstering a lot of star power and talented players, or they don't really have a whole lot to kind of show for it, like they did when they, broke apart Pierce, Garnett, Ray Allen, and Rondo. So I think having the Celtics at 5 isn't completely far-fetched, but the Pacers at 4 at this point in time, no Halliburton the whole year, no Miles Turner. I mean, give me a break. I'm not saying Miami is necessarily going to be better than them in the regular season overall, but I don't see 6 teams or 5 to 6 teams being in between the Pacers and Miami in the regular season at this point in time. I could see the Pistons maybe being a 4 or a 5 seed, just because Cade Cunningham is an absolute stud, and the roster they've started to build around him right now is a lot more promising. But I also don't think the Atlanta Hawks necessarily could be better than Miami either. So I think to have Miami at 10 at this point in time is a very unfair prediction. Drop in the comments where you think Miami should be seeded, because I really think they're more of an 8th, 7th seed type of team, at least at this point in time, because they definitely still have to get the roster they have right now a little bit more comfortable and developed. Now, granted, in some of these preseason games, a lot of the pieces of concern like Powell and Wiggins, like I had just mentioned in these trade proposals. There was a lot of concern about how they're going to develop now with Rozier filling some of the niche that Harrow is going to, or at least going to have to fill some sort of role with Harrow being out. Those all kind of still have question marks over them. But I think in the grand scheme of things, to have Miami at 10 is an absolutely ridiculous take. That's going to do it for today's episode of Your Heat Latest here on FanArc. Don't forget to drop a like on this video and, of course, subscribe to our channel for great daily content, all pertaining to your Miami Heat right here Monday through Friday. Thanks so much for joining us on this wonderful Friday. I'm Sam Shapiro. Have a great weekend, everybody.